I always considered myself an experienced hiker. Growing up in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, I knew the trails like the back of my hand. So, when I decided to take a solo trip into the deeper, more secluded parts of the range, I felt confident. I'd packed enough supplies for a 3-day journey, and my phone was loaded with maps and emergency contacts. The first day was perfect. The weather was clear, the air was crisp, and the trail was well-marked. I made good progress, enjoying the solitude and the beauty of the untouched wilderness. By evening, I found a suitable spot to set up camp beside a small, bubbling stream. I pitched my tent, cooked a simple meal, and fell asleep to the sound of water flowing over rocks. The next morning, I woke early, eager to explore further. As I packed up, I noticed a faint, overgrown path leading away from the main trail. It wasn't on my map, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to follow it. The path wound deeper into the forest, and the trees grew denser. After about an hour, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, its wood weathered and darkened by time. I approached cautiously, feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. Pushing open the creaky door, I stepped inside. The cabin was empty except for a few broken pieces of furniture and a fireplace filled with cold ash. I explored a bit, but there wasn't much to see. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a small, leather-bound journal on a dusty shelf. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with neat, cramped handwriting. Curiosity piqued. I took the journal and left the cabin, deciding to read it later by the campfire. I continued hiking until I found another suitable campsite, this time in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled by the fire and began to read. The journal belonged to a man named William. His entries detailed his life in the cabin, where he lived alone after his wife had passed away. At first, the entries were mundane, descriptions of the weather, his daily routine, and occasional trips to a nearby town for supplies. Then, the tone changed. He started writing about strange noises at night, the sounds of footsteps outside the cabin, whispers carried by the wind, and shadows moving just beyond the edge of the forest. William wrote about his growing paranoia and fear, convinced that something was watching him. One entry stood out. It was dated December 12th, 1947. _I can't sleep. The noises are louder tonight, and I swear I saw a figure standing just beyond the treeline. Doesn't move, just watches. I don't think I'm alone anymore. The last entry was chilling. If anyone reads this, please know that I tried to leave. It won't let me. I can hear it now, scratching at the door. It's only a matter of time before it gets in. Pray that you never find this place. I closed the journal, feeling a chill run down my spine. The fire had burned low, and the forest around me was eerily silent. The night felt darker, and the shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance with malevolent intent. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just an old story, a product of a lonely man's imagination. As I lay in my tent, sleep eluded me. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made my heart race. I kept thinking about William's last entry and the figure he described. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear was real. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails on fabric. It was coming from outside my tent. My breath caught in my throat as I listened, too terrified to move. The scratching continued, growing more insistent. I mustered the courage to unzip the tent a fraction and peek out. In the dim moonlight, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was tall and thin, its face hidden in shadow. The scratching noise stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, malicious and mocking. I froze, my mind racing. Should I run? Hide? Stay silent? The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I slowly zipped the tent back up and crawled to the farthest corner, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. I don't know how long I stayed like that, paralyzed by fear. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen into a fitful sleep. I woke at dawn, the sunlight filtering through the trees. The figure was gone, but the unease remained. I didn't waste any time packing up. Every rustle of the forest felt like a threat, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I retraced my steps, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the figure again. The hike back to the main trail felt like an eternity. When I finally emerged from the forest, I breathed a sigh of relief. The experience had shaken me to my core, and all I wanted was to get back to civilization. Back in the safety of my home, I researched William and his cabin. There were no records of him, no mentions in any archives or local histories. It was as if he had never existed. But the journal was real, and so were the memories. To this day, I can't explain what happened during that hike. Part of me wants to believe it was just my imagination, fueled by an old, creepy journal. But another part of me knows better. Something was out there, something ancient and malevolent, and it was watching. The snow fell heavily, blanketing the world in a thick, icy silence. I had always loved the mountains in winter, the way the snow muffled sound and made everything feel isolated and serene. But tonight, as I trudged through knee-deep drifts, I was anything but serene. "Max! Max!" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the howling wind. My dog had darted off into the forest hours ago, chasing after something I couldn't see. I had been calling his name ever since, my voice growing hoarse and my hope dwindling. I cursed myself for bringing him up here. The mountains weren't a place for a dog, especially not during a snowstorm. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but everything looked the same. Trees weighed down with snow, dark shapes looming in the white. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a plume of steam in the frigid air. I pulled my coat tighter around me and adjusted my hat, but the cold seeped through my layers, biting into my skin. The sky was a dark, oppressive gray, the kind that promises more snow and no reprieve. "Max!" I called again, my voice cracking. I listened, straining to hear any sign of him, but there was nothing. Just the wind and the distant creak of branches under the weight of the snow. I pressed on, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. My feet were numb, and I stumbled often, the snow making each step a struggle. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes or hours that I wandered, my only focus finding Max. As I walked, a nagging feeling of being watched crept over me. I shook it off at first, blaming it on my frayed nerves, but it persisted. I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly, expecting to see someone, or something, following me, but there was only the snow and the shadows. I remembered the stories I'd heard about these mountains, tales of an urban legend known as the White Lady. Supposedly, she was the ghost of a woman who had died in a blizzard long ago, wandering the mountains in search of her lost child. People said that those who saw her were never seen again. I had always dismissed these stories as superstitions, the kind of ghost tales told around campfires to scare the gullible. But now, alone and vulnerable, I felt a prickle of fear. I tried to shake off the growing unease and focus on finding Max. My flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. I cursed under my breath and slapped the side of it, but it remained stubbornly dark. I fumbled for my phone, using its weak light to guide me. The wind picked up, the snow swirling around me in a blinding flurry. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. I stumbled again, falling to my knees in the snow. As I pushed myself up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood ahead of me, barely visible through the snow. It was a woman, her long hair and dress billowing in the wind, stark white against the darkness. She didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly backed away. The stories flashed through my mind, and I knew, deep down, that this was the White Lady. She began to move toward me, gliding over the snow without leaving a trace. Panic surged through me, and I turned and ran, my legs heavy and uncooperative in the deep snow. I could hear her behind me, the soft sound of her dress rustling like a whisper in the wind. I ran blindly, my only thought to get away. The snow was relentless, the cold biting, but fear drove me on. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to escape. I don't know how long I ran before I stumbled into a clearing. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The wind had died down, and the snow fell softly now, almost gently. I looked around, half expecting to see her standing there, but the clearing was empty. My phone's light flickered and died, leaving me in darkness again. I lay there, too exhausted to move, waiting for the inevitable. But nothing happened. Slowly, I gathered the strength to sit up. I heard a sound that made my heart leap, a faint, familiar bark. "Max!" I called, my voice weak. The barking grew louder, and then he was there, bounding through the snow towards me. I hugged him tightly, relief washing over me. He was cold and wet, but he was alive. I glanced around the clearing, half expecting to see the White Lady, but there was no sign of her. Had it all been in my mind? I didn't know, and I didn't care. All that mattered was that Max was safe. We made our way back slowly, following the trail we had made. The storm had eased, and the moon broke through the clouds, casting an eerie light over the landscape. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the legend of the White Lady haunting my thoughts. We finally reached the cabin, the sight of it a welcome relief. I burst through the door, Max at my heels, and collapsed in front of the fireplace. As I warmed up, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I really seen her? Or was it just a figment of my imagination, brought on by fear and exhaustion? I didn't have an answer, but one thing was certain. I would never forget that night in the mountains, the night I came face to face with the White Lady. And as I drifted off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard a soft, mournful wail in the wind outside.